Okay. Right, so welcome. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Tim Vorley. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor and Dean of Oxford Broookes Business School, and I'm pleased today that we've got Nicolette with us. Nicolette, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi folks, so if you don't know me, I'm Nicolette, and I am the Associate Dean for undergraduate and postgraduate programs. I also happen to be a Professor of Applied Enterprise, so hopefully some relevance to our topic today too.
Great, and I'd just like to thank Crystal as well for helping organise and set up these events that are going to be part of our alumni engagement series. So I'm going to hopefully, he says, share a presentation and get that up on the screen now. So can everyone see that? Is it growing to full screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so like I said, this is the first of the alumni engagement sessions for this year, and I'm going to give a bit of a kind of a talk and a bit of a presentation on what living in an entrepreneurial age looks like, and Nicolette then will kind of come in with some questions and some comments at the end, and also we'd invite comments and questions from you guys as well. So please do think if there's things that you want to say, feel free to use the chat, feel free to kind of raise your hand afterwards and generally join the conversation. So we're really hopeful that this will give you all an opportunity to engage with the business school as alumni, but also hopefully as friends of the business school, and really kind of connect with us on a range of things that colleagues are doing. So before I kick into my presentation, I just want to flag the things that are coming up in the next few weeks. So as you've joined today, we'll send you details of these if you do want to join. But on the 11th of October, we've got Kate Ringham and Lauren Tuckerman, who will be talking about sustainability and decision making. So a hugely important topic for business. We are going to have Brianna Wyatt, who's going to be talking on the 25th of October, and she will be telling us about some of her work related to dark tourism, which is a hugely interesting and very kind of emerging topic in the tourism and hospitality sector. And then we're going to have Christian Ehrlich, who's going to be talking on the 4th of November. And Christian will be talking to us about goal setting and happiness. So something that he's had a lot of success in, talking to different groups of individuals and organizations as well. So if any of those float your boat, then please do follow up, register for those, and make sure that you engage and join us as well. There is an alumni hub. We'll put details of that in the chat, but like I say, do remain engaged and tell us what else you're interested in. So this will take us through to the end of the kind of November season. We will be doing some more webinars in the new year as well. So if you've got things that you're interested in, then please do connect, do tell us about that. And we've got lots of colleagues that will be looking to contribute moving forward as well. So my background is as an academic, and I'm an academic that has studied enterprise and entrepreneurship for a long time. And one of the things that I kind of always start off with is going back to the definitions. Let's try and kind of think about where we are. And I think one of the interesting things for me is when we think about what an entrepreneur is, obviously we think about it as an individual. We think about it as a person. It's someone that, as the definition from the dictionary says there, takes risk, looking at really kind of starting a business, setting up a business, and hopefully, and I think hopefully is a kind of a key phrase in there, takes that financial risk to try and bring profit. And we've all got lots of images of what that entrepreneur might look like in the back of our minds, I think. So I will come back to some of those images a little later on. But one of the things that I guess I want to challenge in this idea of living in an entrepreneurial age is that the entrepreneur, that individual that starts the business, is not the only type of entrepreneurial individual that is in our society today. And increasingly, all of us need to be entrepreneurial and are entrepreneurial in what we do. So thinking about that, when we look at the world around us, we do, I would argue, live in this entrepreneurial world. So whether we're looking at popular TV, so whether you're one of these individuals that watches Dragon's Den or the kind of US equivalent with Shark Tank, very much kind of entrepreneurship has become something that is showcased everywhere. You almost can't get away from entrepreneurship in many respects. But if we think about the importance of entrepreneurs, one of the things that strikes me, whether you're walking down your high street or whether you're kind of looking on the internet, is the range of entrepreneurial endeavors that are all around us. So these individuals that are engaged in entrepreneurial activity, they've become hugely important. Like it says, they're key engines of economic growth. So entrepreneurs, often referred to as the lifeblood of the economy, play a really important role in sustaining economic growth, to drive that, and thinking about not just the economic side of it, but also the social side of it. Lots of emphasis on social change as well, and the whole kind of discourse and thinking about purposeful businesses become particularly important at the moment. And what we're seeing is not just enterprise, we're seeing social enterprise, we're seeing a whole raft of different business forms, community interest companies, which are all kind of testament to this entrepreneurial world. So entrepreneurship, I suppose, doesn't just come in one flavor. And that is really a great thing, because what it allows us to do is to think about how we can be entrepreneurial and what difference we can make to that entrepreneurial world. So entrepreneurs, they kind of thrive on disruption, bringing change about, and they can do that in lots of different ways through the products and the processes, the services that they deliver and create, how that displaces existing services. So we think about Uber, for example, where Uber first started off displacing the kind of conventional taxi, putting the power in the hand of the user with the app. I remember those wet Wednesday mornings when I'd be traveling down to London, and I'd be constantly phoning up the taxi company to say, where's my taxi? I need to get to the station. And now I can see where I've called it, where it arrives, when it's going to drop me off. So that change in the business model of the taxi business, fundamentally, that entrepreneurial activity that was driven what feels like many years ago, but is still a comparatively recent innovation, disrupting the entrepreneurial economy around taxis and about ride hire. So entrepreneurship, I'd say, has also become normalized. Once upon a time, we saw these entrepreneurs as people that sat on a pedestal, and increasingly it's become so normal through the TV, through the kind of things that we watch, that all of a sudden entrepreneur is everywhere, all around us, and we are part of what is increasingly this entrepreneurial society. So if I kind of wonder from that, the question that we often get asked, are entrepreneurs born or made? So are you born an entrepreneurial individual, or can you become an entrepreneurial individual? And two schools of thought, people definitely polarized, believe in each. But one of the things that I think that I and colleagues at Brooks would say is that we can certainly learn about how the entrepreneurial process works and change the way we think and act to become more entrepreneurial. And again, hugely important that we do that, not because as graduates and alumni of the university, we want everyone to go away and start a business, but as I'll come to later in the presentation, thinking about what entrepreneurship means for you in your careers and the roles that you have. So how can we build and develop those kind of entrepreneurial traits and make them work for us? So we don't need to think about entrepreneurship as a cookie cutter. We can try and develop it in different ways, and thinking about how that all comes together. Okay, so one of the things that I kind of like to look at when we're thinking about entrepreneurship's The Simpsons, and having an example that we can all relate to, thinking about the types of characteristics of the entrepreneurs. When we look at The Simpsons, we've got a whole series of entrepreneurs that exist within The Simpsons. So whether it's Ned Flanders and his kind of leftorium, whether it's Apu, whether it's Comic Book Guy, these are individuals and characters that are pursuing entrepreneurship in the context of The Simpsons. And so what we see is it takes very different forms. We don't all have to be high-flying entrepreneurs working at a global level. Entrepreneurship is things that happens at different levels throughout society. But well, The Simpsons kind of showcases these three fairly different types of entrepreneurs that are often quite localized. They're not looking for that kind of global commerce. They're not trying to grow their businesses necessarily internationally. The Simpsons does feature more prominent entrepreneurs as well. So people like Mark Zuckerberg, you've got Bill Gates, Elon Musk, the likes of Richard Branson. So we are seeing, again, these entrepreneurs kind of normalized in mainstream media. All makes a huge difference to how we see, reflect, and relate to entrepreneurs. But if we go on to unpack entrepreneurship a little bit further, one of the things that we need to kind of think about is, where did it come from? So the kind of, from the French verb, and the famous quote from a US president, "There is no French word for entrepreneurship," comes from the word about undertaking. And we can see that actually entrepreneurs are people that take action, or entrepreneurial people take action is probably how I'd phrase it. So making things happen, how do we do that? How do entrepreneurs go about that, thinking about the difference that they can make and how that plays out? And again, I'd suggest that it's not just about starting a business. We can see that that difference, undertaking activity, driving change, can occur in a multitude of different ways and in different realms of society. And I'll say a bit more about that. But before I jump on, the picture there on the right is a graphic taken from Winnie the Pooh. And it is a heffalump rather than an elephant. And that heffalump is this elusive creature, which kind of really does resonate. And there was an academic a number of years ago who referred to this idea of the entrepreneurial heffalump, the fact that we're always trying to hunt the heffalump. Like Winnie the Pooh, we never quite find the heffalump. But actually, I think the interesting thing here is that it's about those characteristics, about those traits. It's about that ability to make and drive change. So again, it's thinking about this rather ephemeral activity, thinking about the action that comes from it. One of the important things is how that applies to you and how it applies to different types of entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial activity that they embark on. So entrepreneurship, the examples that you've seen from The Simpsons there kind of show very much kind of different forms of economic entrepreneurship. But I just want to kind of share a few more examples. So we can think about social entrepreneurs. So Mohammed Yunus there in the Grameen Bank, thinking about how social purpose is very much at the fore. Now, obviously, Grameen, a hugely now internationally recognized example. But if we draw it much closer to home, we've got things like the Oxford Social Enterprise Partnership, where even kind of within Oxford and Oxfordshire, we've got an organisation that is trying to support and champion the interests of social entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurial individuals that have a clear social purpose in terms of what they do. Civic entrepreneurs. So the example there is taken from Thames Valley Police of a civic entrepreneur, where there were a series of police officers that came together from across the Thames Valley area, and they were trying to promote ventures that were about restorative justice. So how can we actually see the justice system not just there to identify criminals and to rule through law, but also to try and see how in an entrepreneurial manner we can see some of those that were convicted putting right their wrongs. So beyond the judicial system, civic entrepreneurship becomes a really important example as well. When we think about policymakers, again, another area that don't really initially make you think, oh, entrepreneur. But actually, we've got some great examples within the policy system in the UK of policymakers and civil servants being entrepreneurial. So the Open Innovation Team, which is part of the Cabinet Office, have created a model of policy development that sees them working with a wide range of universities. So trying to engage, to pursue research that actually then feeds into that policy process. So policy entrepreneurs, another kind of interesting example, and one of the areas that I find I'm often engaging with when talking to policymakers in different ways. How can we challenge the way that they do things, be disruptive and undertake different outcomes? Hidden entrepreneurs. So there's a whole raft of examples about off the books activity, kind of cash in hand entrepreneurship. Again, kind of the types of services. Some of this is about bartering, some of it's about exchanging services, but entrepreneurship that's often kind of not a formal part of economic activity, but a hugely important part of making the economy work, but one that increasingly governments are trying to mainstream. So how can we ensure that we don't have as much kind of hidden or underground entrepreneurial activity within the economy? Another thing that I just wanted to touch on, and one of the areas that, again, I've done a bit of work over my career, is thinking about corporate entrepreneurship. So we know that many of our graduates go on to work within bigger businesses during their careers. So if we think about the idea of the corporate entrepreneur, it does sound like a bit of an oxymoron. How do these two things come together? So if you are an individual that's gone into a big organization, it's not to say that you can't be entrepreneurial. So how do you pursue entrepreneurial activity within big organizations? And on the right hand side there, you've got a series of kind of interesting examples about where we've had corporate employees that have been doing entrepreneurial things. So for example, the accidental invention of the post-it note came about when there were a group of individuals working within 3M, and they were constantly trying to, through their meetings, stick these stickies up, and then all of a sudden it became a basis for a new product. So this identifying the problem, creating a solution to the problem, and that problem then being scaled up into something that became a new product. Again, thinking about things like the like button, again, developed in a hackathon by colleagues within Facebook. So it's about the ability to bring up these ideas within your organization. And again, we don't want corporate businesses, and they wouldn't work if they were all full of entrepreneurs. But one of the key things that I'd say, it's about being able to bring something new to the table. So we can see that corporate entrepreneurs, the kind of 3 points in blue there, it's about the creation perhaps of doing something new within a business. How can we see it go off in a new or different direction? Like the PlayStation was, it was never something that was there as a core part of Sony's business model, but it then really proliferated and has gone on to be one of their most successful new business units within Sony. Thinking about the pursuit of new strategies. So again, strategic thinking, critical thinking, something that again through Brooks we are absolutely kind of focused that our graduates leave with. But how do you utilize that within your career? How do you use those abilities and those capabilities to change the direction of the organization that you're working with? So bringing and identifying opportunities and strategies on how to exploit them to the table. And again, thinking the third point there about this idea of emergence of new ideas from within an organization. Often when you're working within a particular sector, you begin to see different examples where there's an opportunity. And again, you can look at the Allianz example of micro insurance there. It came from their wider insurance activities and trying to identify that opportunity for where they go. So again, entrepreneurship becomes something that relevant to absolutely every area of an individual's career. So not just something that we want to see kind of pigeonholed. It's not a case of you're an entrepreneur or you're not, but these different types of entrepreneurship. And rather than thinking about entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs as an individual and a type of business formation, thinking about it as a process, a way of working that we can bring into any career or way of working that we have. So if we think about this, I quite like this, and some of you may have seen this before, but this is something called the ENTRECOMP framework. And what it does is it identifies the types of skills that comprise what the entrepreneurial portfolio looks like. And we know from talking to employers, and again, many of you as graduates will now be aware that employers value these entrepreneurial skills. So the ENTRECOMP identifies it into 3 areas. When we talk about entrepreneurial skills, it talks about being able to engage and to articulate different ideas and opportunities, to be able to think about mobilizing resources, but also putting them into action. And again, the idea of having entrepreneurial knowledge, skills and attitudes is hugely important. And again, the link for this is there on the slide at the bottom. Feel free to kind of have a look at that. We'll again put the link in the chat afterwards. But think through your careers. Think about what that means for you, reviewing, assessing and developing entrepreneurial skills. They're skills that you can constantly refresh, constantly harness and develop. But if we have a quick look into the ENTRECOMP, again, there's many things in here that you'll recognize from what you've done at university. There's things in there that you do probably day to day within your working lives, but it's about trying to think, how can you mobilize these to achieve more entrepreneurial outcomes? So things about creativity, looking at the opportunity spotting, trying to develop new ideas, thinking about creating a new vision, all in that kind of top right. Towards the bottom, the ability to kind of mobilize resources. Sometimes that's going to be financial, other times it's going to be about working with people. How do you collaborate effectively? How do you partner and how do you make things happen? And moving across again to the bottom right, thinking about motivation and perseverance, characteristics that are hugely important when it comes to thinking about what that means for you as individuals in achieving your goals. And again, the big difference, if we kind of think back to that idea of entrepreneurship as undertaking, we need to put this into action. So it does become about taking the initiative. It is about putting things into practice and also learning through that experience. So again, how do you do that within your respective organizations? By building alliances, thinking about problems and articulating opportunities. So ENTRECOMP is a nice little way of packaging this up and thinking about that framework. But again, making sure that you continually reflect, assess and develop your entrepreneurial skills, because again, the career moving forward is very likely to differ from that of generations past, where it was all about working in a company and climbing a single career ladder. So if we think a bit more about now the kind of the nature of entrepreneurship and where that comes in. So entrepreneurship in careers, hopefully from what I've said, you can begin to see that yes, entrepreneurship can lead to business creation. It can be something that then you do within a business that you may start, but also it's hugely important to working and to your employment as well. So whether you are working in a big business or a small business, those entrepreneurial skills, entrepreneurial values become hugely important. And I would suggest to end that one of the things that when we think about entrepreneurial careers now, there is a huge opportunity. And this is why certainly my interest in entrepreneurship and kind of the positioning of Oxford Brooks Business School, thinking about what it is that we're doing with entrepreneurial and enterprising pedagogy, is thinking that the entrepreneurial career, it's really about thinking of your narrative. I say at graduation that it's not about taking a path, it's about making one. And again, that really resonates with that entrepreneurial outlook. And I think that we want our graduates to be able to make that path and identify those opportunities. But with that, there become new challenges. So you need to have that idea of where you're going instead of trying to climb a ladder that's ahead of you. So trying to put those steps into process presents a challenge, but it also brings with it new opportunities. So, and again, to finish, I love the idea that entrepreneurship is a mindset, not a type of work. It's not about starting a business, but you can take that mindset and those different traits, those different characteristics into whatever it is that you do. And I would strongly encourage you to think about it from the position that actually we're all entrepreneurs. If we don't work as entrepreneurs and we're not thinking in those terms, it's going to be harder to get ahead. But actually you can put these skills, those attitudes, those knowledges and behaviors into action in whatever you do. So I'm going to leave it there, but thank you for listening. The one thing that I would say is that there are lots of opportunities to engage with us, colleagues on this call and around the school who are supporting those with entrepreneurial skill development through a lot of the things that we're doing in the professional education space and postgraduate education spaces as well. So if you do want to find out more, feel free to drop us an email on the end, but I will stop sharing and I will hand back over to Nicolette for a few thoughts.
Thanks, Tim. And I'll say what I said to Tim when he shared what he was going to talk about yesterday, that he's all right. He'll get a job as an entrepreneurship lecturer with us any day. And that really speaks to the fact that some of what Tim shared with us actually may be reassuringly familiar for some of you in the room and intriguing for others. And to help me, if you like, chair and steward the next 20 minutes or so, it'd be really helpful if you put in the chat if you're an alumnus or alumna, when you graduated and from which program, and if you're a student currently, which program you're on. That really help me sort of navigate where we'll take this conversation. But in either case, we felt that now more than ever, it's important for us all to sit back and think, actually, the importance and significance of, as Tim calls it, the entrepreneurial mindset, in whatever way that manifests. There couldn't be a more important time. You know, as I assume many of you may be just a few years out of your studies, and you will be entering or have entered a world of work which is much more dynamic than the one that I entered when I left university. In fact, Tim said he's a lifelong academic. I had a commercial career first, but it was actually my engagement through my MBA with this notion of enterprise, entrepreneurship, which I thought wasn't relevant, in fact, to me, But in fact, it was engaging with that notion and the sorts of concepts that Tim's spoken about that really opened my eyes to why I'd been successful in my previous career, the sort of person that I was now that I work at Brooks. I came to understand that I was actually quite entrepreneurial, and it was really liberating for me. And so, like Tim and many of my colleagues who are gathered here, we're very committed to continuing to help students and our alumni continue to see the relevance of the entrepreneurial concept for their lives beyond university. So, as I say, for me, a lot of what Tim spoke to and why we called it living in an entrepreneurial age is that, yes, number one, your working lives are going to be much more dynamic. There's much more job disruption, work disruption, world disruption. The world is more global. You're much more influenced by so much diversity, but also the opportunities or the needs that you might see. You have greater access to. Technology, of course, is an oft-cited one, and Tim gave the example of Uber, which, you know, fundamentally, obviously, has been enabled by technology. But, you know, on top of all of the fact that the world of work is changing, and many of you will change jobs frequently. I have a couple of sons who are in their 20s, and they've already changed jobs 3 times. And when they first made the change after a year, I was horrified. But that is the way of the world today. And again, you will have heard this from perhaps your own parents or grandparents, that, you know, gone are the days when you folk will stay within one job for more than even 5 years, I would think. So portfolio careers await you, and the entrepreneurial skills, as Tim mentioned, and attributes will set you up really well to be successful in that sort of world. The ability to flex, be creative, innovative, adaptive, resilient, all of those things are relevant. And then on top of all of that, we then get COVID, which completely turns the world upside down. Both personally and professionally. And I was quite interested, actually, reading a recent McKinsey report, which said that 90% of chief executives believe that COVID will fundamentally change the way that they do business over the next 5 years. That doesn't necessarily seem a surprise. And when they tap into it from a personal perspective, 2/3 say that this is the most challenging period in their executive career. And I think Tim and I might agree with that. But that also 3/4 see that COVID brings huge opportunities for growth. So whilst it's challenging, there's the opportunity, but more significantly, and I think this is where there's a great opportunity for you, either if you're already an exec or you are working in some of the lower levels of management, that whilst those executives, some 50% feel that well equipped to deal with core business, only 20% feel equipped to deal with growth. And this is where that entrepreneurial mindset, being entrepreneurial, either you see new business opportunities or you see how you can enable the organization you work for. So you are the next generation, largely. I'm assuming most of you are in the first part of your career, but I'll have a look at that in a moment. But Tim's point, therefore, also that an entrepreneur who has all these attributes, one of the fundamental ones is this constant being on the move, curious, and that includes upskilling and finding new opportunities to develop. And so, yes, you know, part of that portfolio of opportunities you have may well be connecting back with somewhere like Brooks for some further education, whether, you know, a master's or some short courses. But equally, you have your network. And your network includes the bunch of people sitting here. And those of you that did study any of these concepts of entrepreneurship with us in your degree, you will know that one of the fundamental attributes of an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial person is that they recognize it's not just them that makes things happen, it's their network. Their network becomes part of their resource. And so that's where I was also hoping that you would share your own background in the chat here. And so I'll have a look in a moment at where you studied and what you studied. But if you don't mind sharing as well, what you're doing now. Have you set up a business, or actually do you feel you're adding great value doing new things within the organization where you're at? And if you're not, share that as well. And maybe this is a short forum for us to tap into that sort of thing. So couple of things then. The importance of this whole concept for us now more than ever, for you more than ever, but also the liberating notion that anybody can be entrepreneurial, and it can manifest in so many different ways. And this idea that it doesn't have to be you alone. And I think if you just come back to the Tim's EntreComp framework and the 3 big headings, which were ideas and opportunities, resources, and in putting things into action. And I think some of us would naturally feel that we are stronger in one of those 3 than the other 2. And this is where teaming up with people, so that those of you that studied the Belbin roles when you were with us, you know that, there's the person who is the resource investigator. They are great at gathering resources and contacts. And then there are those of us that are very creative and are the plants, and they're the ideas and opportunity spotters. And there are those of us that are the doers, and really strong at the operations. And so, again, never forget that entrepreneurship is not about you going it alone in this sort of superhero individual. And certainly, I think, as an example for us in the business school, we're very team orientated. Those of us on exec are all different. We share very similar values, which helps. We want to make a difference. We want to add value. We want to create opportunity. But we all have different skills and strengths. And that's trying to help us do as best we can pivot, this very, very fashionable word at the moment, which is actually about adaptability, isn't it? Adapting. And so when we had to adapt online, we had to draw on all our entrepreneurial reserves to do that. So I hope some of those thoughts and reflections resonate back to you. So we've got some 20 minutes left. I'll have a look in a moment. But what I would quite like to invite you and colleagues is, as I say, this forum, and I hope you came to this forum also not just with the expectation that you would hear something, and particularly if you heard things which felt familiar, and that was reassuring, but you are part of our network, you are, and we part of yours. So please do share some of your own reflections on this idea. Do you think entrepreneurs are born or made? How you've seen the notion of being entrepreneurial and entrepreneurship really resonate for you in your working life, or not actually, and challenge us. That we're as much about how you think we have misunderstood the contemporary environment. So please feel free to put your hands up, to put something in the chat about some comments, not just sharing who you are, but what you feel about what you've heard. Again, I'll encourage colleagues, if they wish, to chip in by saying something as well. So don't feel it all has to be in the chat, folks. Do put up your hand if you wish. So I see while I'm waiting for some people to make some comments about what they think, I can see that we've got people from all sorts of wonderful backgrounds: hospitality, marketing, those areas in particular, I think, have undergone huge change with technology and social media. And we even have a PhD qualified entrepreneurship, which is fantastic. So looks like studying hospitality with us inspired further interest in entrepreneurship. So I see there's somebody who's planning on starting a sustainable online travel business after graduation. That's fabulous. And I think the notion of something which is has a real social concern, in this case sustainability, is key and fundamental. And I think that's fabulous. I see Ross has a question. Ross, do you want to try and answer that question yourself? I do have a few. I think the folk hero can hinder. What do you want to say about it, Ross?
Oh, that's very teachery, Nicolette. You turn the question back at me.
Yeah, completely.
I was interested to hear what both you and Tim thought of it, because so often you have the folk heroes. There is so much publicity on that final year module that Kelly and Sam have mentioned. We do a Dragon's Den and so on and so forth. So it's out there so much. What I think we try and do within our undergraduate enterprise course is to challenge that myth and to sort of stretch people. And in my experience of working with dozens, if not hundreds of entrepreneurs, is that they're hugely varied in backgrounds, in outlook and so on, in the types of ventures that they're setting up and so forth. So I think it's sort of a double-edged sword. The profile of entrepreneurship, increasing from a sort of a general public perspective, I think has positives, but there's also some challenges there. There does seem to be a sort of a prevalence of white male of a certain age, entrepreneurs that are out there, and that's changing gradually, but it takes time for the sort of the mainstream media discourse to be challenged. I think that's part of our job, and I think these sort of sessions are a way of doing it.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, and I think, Ross, you probably know that for me, in fact, I'd love to see no Dragon's Dens. I think that'd be really turning things on its head and saying, that got entrepreneurship on the map, if you like, in terms of people's consciousness. But you're right, let's look at, let's do only social enterprises established by women, or, as we know, we've got some wonderful research going on by colleagues in our own school, looking at migrant entrepreneurship, people trying to establish and add value and survive economically in very adverse conditions like conflict zones. And so I think let's try and, now that, entrepreneurship, if you like, is on the map, absolutely surface a few more of those. And so, for example, as some students who've worked with us know, we do increasingly try and say, let's have only female entrepreneurs as case studies in this module for a change, or, as I say, people who are doing things in the public sector, as Tim has mentioned. So I agree, and I think that's why our alumni really come in, because you are, the lady or gentleman who's setting up the sustainable online travel business. Again, that's a fabulous example, and I guess that person might not consider themselves to be anything like Alan Sugar. I don't know, I'm just guessing, Kelly, but yeah, I'm guessing that's the case. So the more examples we have of that, absolutely the better. And again, those of you that know Brooks well enough know that our Brooks Enterprise Support, that's our extracurricular part of the university, has a number of programs which could support particular types of potential entrepreneurs who might not normally be our obvious sort of folk hero that Ross mentioned. So we have programs dedicated particularly to certain ethnic minority groups to help surface and unlock what's normally already there, and just to give it a bit of support. So yeah, so any more examples from anybody in terms of either the sorts of opportunities you see out there, or the types of skills, and perhaps suggestions for places like us about how we can continue to support you in this whole journey of being and maintaining your entrepreneurial mindset. I think none of us will pretend that we don't go through phases where we feel less entrepreneurial or more constrained, and need to tap into some extra support or mentoring. I know that again, some very entrepreneurial people that I have huge respect for, that they sometimes do say, actually, I hook up time to time with a mentor who stimulates me or challenges me in a different way, and seek out people who are very different to you. I think for me, I shared with you earlier that I felt very liberated by getting to know the notion of entrepreneurialism, and it helped me understand that when there were people that I found difficult to work with, challenging to work with, it was actually often really positive things came out of that, and that understanding came from my understanding of enterprises embracing diversity of views and personalities as that sort of what we call creative spark, that creative destruction. It's so that enabled me and still today does. When I have people who are very different to me, I recognize that they're probably giving something to my ideas and creativity that I can't find in myself. So yeah, and so we've got a question, I think. I'm going to read it out. So my father is a government employee all his life. So I've seen him, his routine. Yeah, I think that resonates for many of us. Our parents had very, very predictable lives. And just because all the knowledge I have is I get from books and haven't experienced it practically. So I'm sure Tim might want to say something about this, but I would say that the fact that you've already started is a huge positive. You should take great comfort and confidence from the fact that you have started. That already, when we look at entrepreneurial theories, often this links to the question Tim had around born or made. Many academics say you shouldn't judge an entrepreneur by their so-called personality or their background. You should judge an entrepreneur by their action. And so you have already taken action. And I think so you should regard that as a real positive. And then in terms of knowledge and experience, I think I would surface something I mentioned just now, is that look around your network, look around this network. So talk to people who are also doing an online business, or, I mean, the internet is a fabulous way to make connections now, and networks, LinkedIn, of course, this alumni community here. So I would say, don't forget you're not alone. So try and work with people who are also trying things, and see where are your areas of relative less strength. So I'm rubbish at numbers, so I always try and hook up with somebody who's just got this head for finance, and so that's what I always look to partner up with, and I think that's not untypical.
Yeah,
maybe,
no, I was say maybe come in on that as well, because I think that one of the things that's always challenging is that kind of parents and other kind of formative figures, they become hugely important role models. And when you are going off and doing something quite so different, there is that element of finding your feet and doing it your own way. And I think that when it comes to kind of pursuit of entrepreneurial activity, that there will be things that go wrong. And I think that when we kind of talk and think as a university, what we're trying to do is to create that safe environment. Often we talk about people failing and learning, and I think that it's a case of trying to pilot, to fail fast, to see what works, to experiment and get new ideas out there. So I think, first of all, kudos. I think you've done great. You've obviously set something up where you've now got a business. You are an entrepreneur. And I think that it is about trying and thinking about where and what the opportunities are for the business to grow. So are there things where you can connect in? We think about whether you've got other partners you can work with. Is there ways of kind of, in your case, I guess, kind of selling the product, selling the rugs in different places? Are there different things that you could do and people you could partner with? So all of these kind of things are absolutely about trying to see how you can try and grow the business. And this is why we think of kind of entrepreneurs as the engines of growth. It is about trying to do that. But as an alumni of the university, don't forget as well that kind of for years, 3 years after you graduate, and you've got the ability to access some of those resources as well. So if there are questions that you've got or support that you're looking for, or to diversify into new markets, then do come back and ask us those questions as well.
Yeah, also building on that, if you are, running or setting up a business, again, many of you remember most of our programs have student, consultancy projects. So, you could always tap back into some of the tutors that you work with and say, I've got a project, have you got a student group in one of the modules who might want to do a bit of whatever it is, market entry research or some branding suggestions. So, you can tap into to some free expertise there on some of our programs as well. So yeah, I mentioned in the chat as well. So Ross had put in around a Spark program. So as I mentioned, Brooks Enterprise Support has programs running, quite a few of which are open to alumni. So do feel free. And in fact, we're about to open, if you happen to be near Oxford. We're opening a new enterprise centre where again there'll be a co-working space, an incubation space. So if you happen to be at that stage, but that's all about the sort of startup side of things. On the Broookes Enterprise Support, many of their programs do acknowledge that not all people who engage in the programs are necessarily actually going to end up in starting a business, but some of those key things we spoke about and Tim spoke about, some of those attributes of you know, whether it's some of the knowledge or some of the skills, those programs do develop those also. And as Tim mentioned, again, as alumni, sometimes you're interested to hear that we are looking to embed that across all of our programs going forward, so that future students, no matter what subject they study with us at the business school, will have understood and heard and learnt about all of this, and hopefully feel empowered to take that forward. So that's great, Walid, well done. So identity, I'm picking up something from Tatiana on identity, and the process of becoming an artist is you have to be entrepreneurial in your actions. Yeah, that's such an important thing to say. Thank you so much. I think particularly often in the creative arts, one needs to be entrepreneurial, and because you have to learn that you're experimenting all the time. You know, a work may never be finished, let alone trying to establish your way. So I think that's a really valuable example. So any of you that are going more into that line of interest, I've personally got huge respect for those in the creative arts and how entrepreneurial they are inherently as a discipline, but also in order to make your way, to keep a roof over your heads is you have to be entrepreneurial. So yeah, absolutely. So yes, so for me, I've picked up from Tatiana about identity, and for me, coming back to my own journey, is it was really empowering to think I have some traits which appear to be something called entrepreneurial. I haven't started a business. I don't intend to start a business, not anytime soon anyway. I do change jobs every couple of years. Don't worry about that, Tim. And I think that's just a sign of somebody who likes to, I see an opportunity and yeah, I'm up for it. So I think I come back to why Tim and I felt it was really important to have this particular topic. As I say, some of it may have been familiar to you, some not, but we felt it was just to reconnect you with, or introduce you to, the fact that these are really powerful, important ideas and things to recognize in yourself and the opportunities available to you. There's plenty you can read out there about it or online, but feel empowered that being entrepreneurial is going to really stand you in good stead, whether you're working for a government body or a small charity, or even whether you're a doctor. That sounds scary, but it is true. You may see ways to improve process that can be entrepreneurial and very important, as we know with COVID. So yeah, I hope you found this helpful. Please do two things, I think. Remember, you're part of this network. It's entrepreneurial to remain part of this network, and hopefully that will feed you. And do please give us ideas, as Tim said, about what you would like further. We've got some talks coming up. What more would you like in those sorts of talks? What has this particular session inspired that you think you could share with us that we should be thinking of doing for you? Beyond obviously a webinar series, what can we be doing for you to help? And finally, say, you know how we work in the program, so some of you may tap back in and say, actually, yeah, a student project would really help me. Tim, did you want to say anything?
No, just thank you, really. Thank you for Nicolette for chairing, and thank you very much everyone for joining. We've obviously got the future webinars for alumni and friends and students of the school coming up. It's a great way to connect that is outside of kind of formal structures, so it's not meant to be something that is highly formal. I hope to see some of you joining the next ones. Please do share it with other people as well that you think might be interested, connected to Broookes, and enjoy the rest of the day. So thanks very much for giving up your time at lunch to have lunch with us.
So I suggest we can stop the record, and then if anybody's got a particular question off camera, we can just, we've got a few minutes, haven't we?